At 11:30 p.m., my brother took the Marina keys. By sunrise, the $92,000 speedboat was smashed against the rocks. Mom screamed, "Stop blaming him. It was an accident." I didn't defend myself because that boat wasn't mine. Mom went pale when the marina owner stepped onto the dock holding the registration papers. The hull of a 28-foot bayliner was wedged between two rocks 40 yards off the breakwater. Listing hard to starboard, its bow cracked open like something had tried to split it in half from the inside. I stood on the dock at slip 14, with my clipboard under my arm and the taste of coffee still burning the back of my throat, and looked at $92,000 of fiberglass grinding itself apart in the low morning tide. The bowline had been untied from the dock cleat and tossed onto the planks. The stern line was still secured to the aft cleat, but its rope end was frayed and torn where the boat had powered forward against it until the line snapped. Someone had removed the bowline, started the engine, and throttled out of the slip while the stern was still tied. The orange cork float keychain on my belt loop caught the sunrise, and when I looked down at it, and then at slip 14, at the empty water where Dr. Aldridge's boat should have been sitting, I knew before checking the cameras exactly who had done this. It was barely sunrise on a Sunday morning in July, and I had been the operations manager at Brookfield Marina for 4 months. Before that, I was the assistant coordinator for 3 years. Every slip, every vessel, every contract, every camera angle, every tide table printed on the office wall was part of my job. Low tide that morning had dropped the channel rocks to barely 2 feet below the surface. Any person who worked on the water would know that. Any person who did not would not think to check. My brother Troy did not work on the water. He did not work anywhere. He was 26 years old, living in my mother's basement, between his 4th and 5th job, with a phone bill I had been paying for 14 months, and a talent for breaking things that belonged to other people. The marina office was dark when I unlocked it. 4 security cameras covered the docks, the parking lot, the fuel dock, and the main gate. I sat down at the security desk and scrubbed the overnight footage. Just after 3 in the morning, a figure walked through the main gate soaking wet, salt water dripping off his shorts, carrying his shoes in one hand. He crossed the parking lot and sat on the hood of a silver Honda Civic that had not been there when I locked up Saturday evening. I kept scrubbing backward. Just before midnight, that same figure had walked through the gate using a key. My key. The one on the orange cork float that I always clipped to my belt loop, the one Hank Brookfield had handed me my first week on the job and said, "Don't drop them." That's 30 years of trust on one ring. The figure on the screen was Troy. I watched him walk to slip 14, step onto the bayliner's swim platform, and lean into the cockpit. 2 more figures followed him through the gate minutes later. Within the hour, the boat was gone from the slip. By 3 in the morning, Troy was back, alone, soaking wet, carrying his shoes. His 2 friends were nowhere in the frame. The boat was on the rocks, and Troy had put it there, and my keys had opened the gate. I saved the footage to the office computer and backed it up to a USB drive. The USB went into my jacket pocket. Then I sat there for a few minutes and let myself understand the full shape of what had happened. The crack in the hull was below the waterline. The port strake was sheared clean off where it had hit the rock edge at speed. 4 years of assessing storm damage had taught me to read hull fractures the way a doctor reads an X-ray. This was impact at 15 to 20 knots against a fixed object. The salvage alone would cost $2,200. From the fracture below the waterline, I knew a total loss was likely. A marine surveyor would make it official, but the hull told me everything I needed to know. If you are new here, welcome to Family Secret Tales. What I am about to tell you is not just about a wrecked boat. It is about what happens when the person a family treats as their cleanup crew stops cleaning up. My mother, Vivian, raised me and Troy alone after our father left when I was 9. She worked 2 jobs for years. She held things together. I will never pretend she did not sacrifice. But somewhere inside all that sacrifice, a system formed, and the system had rules nobody voted on but everybody followed. I was the responsible one. Troy was the one who needed help. When Troy got a Dewey at 19, Vivian paid the $2,000 lawyer fee and told me to drive him to his court dates because she could not take the time off. I was 23. I had just started at the Marina. 4 court dates over 3 months cost me 2 morning shifts, and Hank never said a word, but he checked the schedule those mornings and I saw him checking. Troy never thanked me for the rides. He sat in the passenger seat and scrolled his phone, and once asked me to stop at a drive-thru on the way home from the courthouse. I stopped. I paid for his food. I drove him home. Vivian met us at the door and hugged Troy and told him it would be over soon, and looked at me over his shoulder and said, "Thank you, sweetheart. I knew I could count on you." She said it the way someone thanks a vending machine for dispensing what they paid for. When Troy got fired from his second job, a warehouse position he held for 4 months, Vivian told me it was the supervisor's fault. When he got fired from the third, a parts counter at an auto supply store, she said the hours were unreasonable. By the time the fourth ended, she stopped explaining and started asking. The asks always started the same way. "Gemma, I need a small favor." When Troy lost his third job in 2 years, Vivian called me on a Wednesday night. "I need you to add his phone to your plan," she said. "He has to stay reachable for interviews." "Mom, that is $165 a month with the phone installment and plan. It is temporary, Gemma. He is trying." 14 months later, Troy was still on my plan. The phone was mostly used for group chats about pickup basketball and brewery openings. I stopped asking when he would take it over because asking made Vivian cry. And when Vivian cried, it meant a 90-minute phone call about sacrifice and family and how she had given up her teaching career for us and how the least we could do was hold together. The math was simple. 90 minutes of guilt cost more than $165, so I paid. When I started at Brookfield, the family system found a new target. It started small and grew the way weeds grow between dock planks, slowly enough that you do not notice until the whole surface is covered. The gate code came first. Vivian gave it to her book club for a sunset wine party on the guest dock. 12 women with glasses and cheese boards, no signed liability waiver, no notification to management, no cleanup plan. The next morning, I found 2 broken wine glasses floating in the water, a cheese knife wedged between the planks, and a stain on the guest bench that took 40 minutes to scrub. The cleaning cost $200. I paid it from my own check and said nothing to Hank because I did not want him to know my mother had treated his Marina's access code like her Netflix password. Then the fuel dock. Troy had a jet ski he kept at a friend's lake house. He started bringing it to the Marina on weekends and fueling it at the commercial pump, punching in the account code I had made the mistake of writing on a sticky note in the office. Over 2 summers, the charges added up to $1,400. When I confronted Vivian, she said it was an oversight. "He thought it was included because you work there," she said, as if my job came with a family fuel plan. Troy also stored the jet ski in Slip 22 for 3 months without a contract, without insurance, without asking anyone. The unpaid slip fee was $600. I covered all of it, moved the fuel charges to a miscellaneous line item, paid the slip difference from my own check, said nothing to Hank. The excuse I gave myself was that I was protecting my job. Part of that was true. But the bigger part was uglier and harder to say out loud. I was protecting the only version of family I had left, and every season the cost of that version went up, and the thing it protected got thinner. One person at the Marina saw through it. Bo Harlan had been a dockhand at Brookfield for 22 years. He was 59, built like a fence post, and he did not waste sentences. My first winter as operations coordinator, a storm broke 3 boats loose from their moorings at 2 in the morning. I drove to the marina in the dark, scared and unsure of the protocol because I had only been doing the job for 5 months, and the manual did not cover wind at 50 knots. Bo was already there. Hip deep in the black water, retying lines bare-handed. He looked up when I ran down the dock and said one thing. "Grab that stern line, Marsh. We got about 4 minutes before the next swell. No manual. No condescension, just the work." We saved all 3 boats. He never mentioned it to Hank. Every time I second-guessed whether I belonged at that marina, I thought about his voice in the dark. Calm and sure, treating me like someone who could hold a line. That Saturday night in July, Vivian invited me to dinner. The kitchen smelled like smoked brisket and garlic mashed potatoes, and the candle she always lit when she was performing the role of mother who holds everything together. Troy was at the kitchen counter scrolling his phone with one thumb, barefoot. A beer opened next to his elbow on a Saturday evening. The table was set with the cloth napkins, which meant she was in a good mood or wanted something. Troy did not look up when I walked in. Vivian kissed my cheek and said, "You look tired, baby. Sit down." I hung my jacket on the chair and clipped the cork float keychain to my belt loop the way I always did. At some point during dinner, the clip dug into my hip and I set the keychain on the counter next to my water glass. I left it there when I went to the bathroom. Left it there when I helped Vivian wash the dishes. I drove home around 9 and did not realize the keys were gone until I was already in bed, reaching for the counter where I always put them and finding nothing. 10-minute drive. I would pick them up in the morning. I set my alarm for early, turned off the light, and closed my eyes. Just after 5, my phone rang. Vivian, talking fast. Something about Troy and a boat and the marina and an accident, and it was not his fault. "Stop blaming him, Gemma. It was an accident. Just come down here and handle it before anyone else sees." I was in my truck before she finished the 3rd sentence. 4 years of marina work had taught me exactly what Troy and boat and handle it added up to. The math was never complicated with Troy. The bill was the only thing that changed. The dock, the empty slip, the hull on the rocks, the bowline tossed on the planks, the torn stern line frayed at the snap point. $92,000 in vessel value. And on the time-stamped footage at 11:30 p.m., Troy lifting the orange cork float off Vivian's kitchen counter, sliding it into his jacket pocket before driving to the marina. I did not call Vivian back to argue. The registration inside Hank's filing cabinet carried a name none of us shared. That boat was not mine. It was not my family's. And the person it belonged to would not be managed with tears and excuses. About an hour later, Vivian's sedan pulled into the lot. Troy was in the passenger seat wearing clean clothes, dry hair. He had gone home after the crash, showered, changed, and let his mother drive him back like he was arriving for a dentist appointment. Vivian walked onto the dock first. She looked at the rocks, looked at the empty slip, and started talking before her feet stopped moving. It broke loose in the wind. The mooring failed. "You need to write it up as weather damage, Gemma. These things happen." The bowline was untied and tossed on the dock. Mom, the stern line snapped under engine power. That boat did not break loose in the wind. "Stop blaming him, Gemma. It was an accident. He was just looking at the boat. He did not mean to take it out, just looking at the boat at midnight, in someone else's slip. With 2 friends." Vivian's jaw tightened. "Lower your voice. My voice is not raised." I turned to Troy. He was standing 6 feet behind Vivian, hands in his pockets, looking at the water like the conversation was about someone else. "What time did you leave the house last night, Troy?" "Around midnight." "Where did you go?" "Just drove around." "In what vehicle?" "Your car is in the parking lot right now. It was not here when I locked up at 6. Troy's mouth opened. He looked at Vivian. "That is enough, Gemma," Vivian said. "Did you take my keys off the counter during dinner?" Troy rubbed the back of his neck. His hand was shaking slightly. He opened his mouth, closed it, and looked at the ground. Beau arrived for his shift shortly after, walking down the dock with his coffee. He looked at the empty slip, looked at the rocks, looked at Troy in clean clothes with dried salt on his sneakers. Beau did not ask what happened. He did not address Vivian. He looked at me and said, "I'll start the damage log when you're ready, Marsh." Then he walked to the fuel dock and started his checklist. He had given me something with that sentence that Vivian had never given me. He treated me like his boss in front of my mother, without being asked. Vivian watched Beau walk away. Something in her posture hardened. The concern drained out of her face and was replaced by the expression I had seen before every guilt campaign, every 90-minute phone call, every demand disguised as an observation about what family owes family. She turned back to me, and the words came out sharp and specific, aimed at the places she knew were soft. "You manage a parking lot for boats, Gemma. You are 30 years old, with no husband, no children, and a one-bedroom apartment that smells like diesel. And you are going to stand here in front of your coworker and refuse to help your own brother over a boat that is not even yours? What exactly are you protecting? Your little clipboard job?" She said it loud enough for Beau to hear from the fuel dock. She said it in front of Troy, who looked at his shoes. She said it into the Sunday morning quiet, where it hung over the dock and the water and the rocks, where $92,000 of someone else's property was slowly filling with seawater. I almost said something back. I almost matched her aim and listed every fuel charge, every gate code, every slip fee. Every phone bill I had quietly absorbed so that her version of family could keep its shape. But I looked at the cork float keychain on my belt, the cracked one, the one Troy had dropped on the Bayliner's deck before he drove it into the rocks, and I stopped. The crack ran down the middle of the foam. It had been whole before Saturday night. It was not whole now. I said nothing. I waited. About an hour after Vivian, a white pickup pulled into the lot. Hank Brookfield, 63 years old, owner of Brookfield Marina for 31 years. He had gotten the after-hours alarm notification around 3 in the morning, but was visiting his daughter in Richmond. He had driven 3 hours straight. He walked onto the dock carrying a manila registration folder. He stopped at slip 14 and looked at the rocks, looked at the empty water, looked at Troy standing 10 feet away in dry clothes with salt on his shoes. Then he opened the folder. "This vessel is registered to Dr. Edward Aldridge. Premium Storage Contract, Section 4. Unauthorized access to a client vessel by anyone other than the registered owner may expose the marina to a $25,000 commercial policy deductible while the carrier investigates responsibility." He removed the registration sheet from the folder, turned it toward us, and tapped the owner's printed name. "Ma'am, who authorized your son to board this boat?" The color left Vivian's face in stages. Forehead first, then cheeks, then jaw. She had built her entire morning around one assumption. This was a family problem with a family solution. And the family solution was, Gemma writes the report, the insurance company writes a check, and the whole thing disappears the way Troy's Dewey disappeared, and Troy's phone bill disappeared, and Troy's fuel charges disappeared. She had rehearsed the word accident in the car. She had not planned for the marina owner standing on his dock holding registration papers with a name on them that was not ours. "It was an accident," she said. Her voice was thinner now. The mooring line, the bow line, was removed and the stern line snapped under engine power, Hank said quietly. "That boat did not break loose in the wind." "Gemma, do we have footage?" "We do." Hank nodded once. "Pull it." "I need to call Dr. Aldridge," Troy finally spoke. His voice was flat, rehearsed, the voice of a man who had practiced the sentence in the car. The wind picked up. I was checking on the boat for Gemma. It came loose and I was trying to bring it back when it hit the rocks. That is all that happened. Hank looked at Troy for a long moment. Then he looked at me. Was this young man authorized to check on any vessel at this marina? No. Was anyone authorized to access this vessel after hours? No, then we have a problem that is bigger than wind. Hank closed the folder. I will be in the office. Bring me the footage and the incident form. If you have been following family secret tales, you know the moment everything flips is never the one you expect. The registration papers were bad. What I found next was worse. That afternoon, while compiling the incident documentation, I pulled the fuel dock logs for the previous 24 months. Troy's unauthorized fuel charges were still there, $1,400 buried in the miscellaneous line items where I had moved them. With an active investigation open, any audit would surface those moved numbers. I had hidden them to protect Troy. Now they were evidence of a pattern. I printed the logs and added them to the incident file myself. My own cover-up was now part of the record. It was the only way to keep the rest of the documentation clean. Monday morning, the police called Troy in for a follow-up statement. He sat across from the officer and did what Troy always did when the pressure got specific. He shifted blame. He told the officer his mother had told him where the keys were. He pulled up the text thread on his phone and showed them. The officer photographed the screen. One of the messages was from Vivian, sent Saturday at 10:48 p.m. The keys are on her counter. She won't notice until morning. The officer included the photograph in the supplemental report. A copy landed on my desk Tuesday morning as part of the Marina's incident file. I looked at the timestamp for a long time. Then I set the report on the desk and sat with my hands flat on the surface. Vivian had not covered for Troy after the fact. She had directed him to the keys. She had timed it. She had calculated that I would not notice until morning, and by then the boat would be back in its slip and nobody would know. The sunset party, the fuel charges, the jet ski, the phone bill. None of it was Troy acting alone. Vivian was the architect. Troy was the tool. The keys on my counter were the latest material she had used without asking. I almost wrote weather damage on the incident report. I held the pen over the line and I thought about Hank handing me the cork float that first week, saying that was 30 years of trust on one ring. The pen did not touch the paper. I pulled the keyboard closer and typed the truth. Tuesday, the insurance carrier called. Filing timeline, 72 hours from the incident. The adjuster explained that the carrier had opened separate reviews into the vessel loss, Troy's unauthorized operation, and the Marina's key control procedures. Nothing had been decided yet. Whether Troy, the Marina, or both would face liability depended on the investigation. Then the adjuster mentioned something else. We received a call last week from someone asking general questions about unauthorized vessel use at marinas. Hypothetical questions. She did not reference a specific policy or give a name we could verify. The call came from a number registered to Vivian Marsh. General questions. Hypothetical. Vivian had not been given the specifics of Brookfield's coverage, but she had called before the crash, before Troy took the keys. 3 days before the Saturday dinner. She had been mapping the landscape, testing whether insurance could absorb the kind of loss she was planning to create. The adjuster emailed me the call log with the timestamp. I filed the incident report Thursday morning. Every line was accurate. Every timestamp matched the footage. The following week, a marine surveyor inspected the bayliner and confirmed what I had suspected from the dock: total loss. Dr. Aldridge's insurer valued the claim at $92,000 and opened a subrogation file against Troy as the responsible party. The Marina's carrier opened a parallel review of the Marina's key control procedures, which meant Hank and I were both answering questions about how a staff key ended up in a non-employee's hand. Dr. Aldridge's attorney sent Troy a preliminary demand letter notifying him that recovery proceedings were being prepared. The letter did not list a final amount yet. It stated that the insurer intended to pursue the full vessel replacement value, plus salvage and legal costs. Once the liability investigation concluded, Troy had no job, no savings, no assets, no insurance. Vivian called the attorney's office and asked about a payment plan. The paralegal told her no arrangement could be discussed until the investigation was complete and the final demand was issued. Vivian asked if her house could be used as collateral. The paralegal said the house would need equity to secure any agreement and that a $114,000 mortgage on a property assessed at $120,000 was unlikely to qualify. 2 weeks after the crash, the monthly slipholders board meeting filled the Marina clubhouse with 32 boat owners in folding chairs, coffee cups balanced on knees, the ceiling fan turning slowly overhead. Dr. Aldridge sat in the front row with his reading glasses on and a legal pad in his lap. Hank stood at the front and presented the incident summary. He did not name Troy, but the facts were unmistakable: unauthorized after-hours access via a staff key, a client vessel valued at $92,000 destroyed against the Channel rocks, insurance claim filed, police report on record, and a full review of after-hours security protocols underway, including new electronic key tracking to replace the manual system. A man in the third row, a retired Coast Guard officer who kept a Boston whaler in Slip 8, raised his hand. Who was responsible? Hank said the police report was public record, available at the county clerk's office, and that the Marina would not be naming individuals at this meeting. The man nodded. The room shifted. People looked at their coffee cups. Then Mrs. Cahill stood up. She was a thin woman in the second row, silver hair, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. She was a member of Vivian's church circle. She and Vivian had lunch together twice a month. She did not look at anyone directly. Vivian Marsh told me last week it was storm damage, she said. She sat back down and folded her hands in her lap. Nobody gasped. Nobody whispered. The silence in the room was thicker than that, heavier, the kind of quiet that lands when 30 people understand the same thing at the same time and nobody wants to be the one to say it. A metal chair creaked. The retired Coast Guard officer unfolded and refolded his arms. A woman near the back turned her head toward the wall. Dr. Aldridge did not turn around. His pen was still. He did not need to turn around. The confrontation happened in layers. The first was Sunday morning on the dock, Vivian calling my career a parking lot and my life a punchline. The second came Thursday evening after the police had Troy's statement and the report was filed. Vivian came to my apartment. She stood in my doorway and told me I had destroyed my brother's future. That demand letter will follow him for 20 years, she said. The police report was an overreaction. Families handle problems inside the family, Gemma. They do not call officers and file paperwork against their own blood. Families also do not steal their daughter's work keys and crash someone else's boat. He made a mistake. He made a choice. And so did you. Vivian crossed her arms. What is that supposed to mean? I let the question sit. Then I walked her through it, line by line. Troy charged $1,400 in fuel to the Marina's operating account over 2 summers. You gave the gate code to 12 women for a party I never approved, and I paid the $200 cleaning fee. Troy stored his jet ski in Slip 22 for 3 months without a contract, which was $600 I covered. You called the Marina's insurance carrier last Thursday, 3 days before the dinner, and asked hypothetical questions about unauthorized vessel use. They have the call log and your phone number and the timestamp. Then on Saturday night, you texted Troy at 10:48 p.m. and told him the keys were on my counter and that I would not notice until morning. Troy showed the police that text himself when he tried to shift the blame to you. That was not a mistake. That was a plan. You mapped the insurance angle. You pointed Troy to the keys, and when it failed, you drove him to the Marina and told me to lie on an incident report so none of it would surface. Vivian's hand found the doorframe. Her mouth opened and closed. She took a half step backward, and her shoulder hit the hallway wall. Her breathing went shallow and fast. Her eyes moved from my face to the floor, to the wall, to her own hands, and back to my face, searching for a version of this conversation where she still had a move left. "Gemma, listen to me." Her voice cracked, but she was still reaching, still calculating. "I was trying to protect both of you. If the insurance covered it, nobody would get hurt. Not Troy, not you, not the Marina. The insurance call was before the crash. You were not reacting to an accident. You were planning for one. That is not what happened. Your phone number is on the call log, Mom. Thursday, you asked about what happens when someone takes a boat without permission. 3 days before you texted Troy where to find my keys. Vivian's left hand dropped from the doorframe. Her right hand went to her collarbone and pressed there. Her knees bent slightly, like the floor had shifted, and she braced herself against the wall. The color in her face was completely gone. Her eyes were wet, but she was not crying. She was recalculating, scanning for the next play. But every play she had ever run required a version of me that answered to guilt and covered the bill and moved the numbers to a line nobody checked, and that version had stopped existing on a dock at sunrise 8 days earlier. You told me I manage a parking lot for boats. You said I had a clipboard job. You said it in front of Bo and your son and the entire dock. I held up the phone with the screenshot of her text to Troy. The parking lot girl kept cameras, Mom, and the boat has a name on the registration that is not ours. Vivian tried 4 times to find a way out of that hallway. The first was a bargain. What if Troy pays it back? We can set up a payment plan. I will co-sign. We can make this go away without the police report going public. The police report is already public, Mom. It was filed Sunday, and Troy has no income to make payments from. The second was a threat. If you do not pull that report, I will tell Hank about the fuel charges you moved. You hid those too, Gemma. You are not clean. The fuel charges are in the incident file. I put them there myself. Hank has seen them. He issued me a written warning for moving those charges, and I signed it. Her face shifted. The threat had been her best card, and I had already played it against myself. The third was a redirect. What about his friends? They were on that boat too. Why is nobody going after them? Troy's friends did not have the keys. Troy did. Troy drove the boat. Troy's name is on the police report because Troy took the boat. The fourth was the whisper. Her voice dropped low, the confessional tone she used when she needed the conversation to feel like prayer instead of argument. Gemma, please, he is your brother. If this goes forward, he will never recover. He took a $92,000 boat that did not belong to him. Drove it into rocks he did not know were there because he does not know what a tide chart is. And he did not call me. He called you. And you told me to write a false report. That is what happened. That is what the file says, and that is what Dr. Aldridge's insurance company is going to read when they decide how much your son owes. No more gate codes for your friends. No more free fuel for Troy. No more covering charges I told myself were small enough to ignore. This is the last dollar, the last favor, the last time I answer this door for either of you. She left without closing the door. I closed it and stood with my hand on the knob and listened to her footsteps getting softer on the stairs until the building was quiet. The cracked cork float keychain sat on my kitchen counter. The crack ran through the middle, splitting the orange foam into 2 halves still attached but barely. I opened the junk drawer and put it inside and closed it. 3 weeks later, Vivian called. She was crying. Your father left when you were 9. I raised you and Troy by myself. I gave up my teaching career for you two. 30 years I held this family together, and this is how you repay me? By letting strangers come after your own brother? I almost answered. I almost let the guilt engine fire back up, the same engine that had powered 14 months of phone bills and 2 summers of fuel charges and 3 months of slip fees and 1 sunset party cleanup and a lifetime of showing up when Troy could not be bothered to show up for himself. but the text sat in my phone. The keys are on her counter. She won't notice until morning. That sentence was not grief. It was not a mother panicking. It was inventory. She had counted my keys the way she counted my patience, and both had been currency she spent without asking. I said nothing into the phone. I let her voice fill the silence for another 10 seconds, and then I opened the screenshot of the security footage, Troy walking toward slip 14 at 11:47 p.m., the cork float visible in his right hand, the timestamp in the corner, the dock lights catching the orange foam in his grip. One frame, one image. Everything she had tried to bury sitting in full color on a time-stamped security camera that she did not know existed when she sent the text about the keys on my counter. I sent it to Vivian. I waited until the message showed as delivered. Then I blocked the number. The next morning, I changed my number at the phone store. The woman behind the counter asked which contacts to port. I said all except one. 2 weeks after that, Vivian's brother Gene called her. Gene was 64, a retired electrician in Fredericksburg who had worked union trades for 35 years. He had heard about the board meeting from a friend who kept a sailboat at Brookfield. "You had your daughter's keys stolen by your son," Gene said. "You tried to get her to lie on an official report. And now you are telling people she is ungrateful. I am not backing you on this, Viv. You do not understand what happened, Gene." Troy was confused. Then he should not have been on the boat, and you should not have told him where the keys were. The silence stretched. You lost the one person in that family who could be counted on. That is yours to carry, not hers. He hung up. Gene was the last person whose opinion Vivian could borrow against. Gene texted me the next day. "Your mother called me looking for backup. She did not get it. You did the right thing." I saved it in a folder labeled People Who Said It Out Loud. 2 entries, Gene and Beau. The demand letter sat on Vivian's kitchen table for 6 weeks. Troy did not get a job. He applied to 2 places in the first week and stopped applying after the second week. Dr. Aldridge's attorney sent a second notice, this one with a preliminary recovery estimate, $92,000 in vessel replacement, plus salvage charges of $2,200, plus legal and administrative fees that were still accumulating. The letter warned that once the final amount was established, the insurer would pursue all available recovery options, which could include wage garnishment once Troy had income. Troy sat at the kitchen table with the letter and a calculator and stared at a number that was larger than anything he had ever earned in a year. Vivian sat across from him and watched him read it twice and said nothing because there was nothing left to say that would make the number smaller. One Tuesday evening in August, around 8 o'clock, Vivian sat at the kitchen table with the demand letters pushed to one side and a glass of water she had poured 20 minutes ago and not touched. Troy was in the basement with the door closed. The house was quiet the way houses get when 2 people live in them and neither one wants to be in the same room as the other. She picked up her phone and scrolled to my contact. The photo next to my name was from a Marina cookout 2 years ago. She pressed call. The automated recording told her the number she had dialed was no longer in service. Please check the number and try again. She held the phone to her ear for 10 seconds after the recording ended, listening to dead air, her thumb resting on the screen. Then she lowered the phone slowly and set it face down on the counter, next to the cracked cork float keychain Troy had left there the morning after the crash. The foam had split wider in the weeks since. The orange had faded to a pale yellow at the edges where salt and sun had bleached it. The 2 halves were still attached, but the gap between them was visible now, and a piece of the brass ring was showing through the crack. She did not pick up the phone. She did not pick up the keychain. She turned off the kitchen light and went to her room. The demand letters stayed on the table in the dark, next to the glass of water and the calculator and the cork float that used to mean something to someone who was no longer reachable. The Saturday after Labor Day, Hank called me into his office. He had reviewed the full incident file. The fuel logs, the insurance call record, the text from the police supplement. He sat behind his desk for a moment. First, the fuel charges. He slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. A formal written warning. You moved $1,400 in unauthorized charges into a miscellaneous line item to hide them. That is falsification of Marina financial records. I need you to sign this, and I need every prior adjustment corrected and documented by end of month. I signed it. He watched me put the pen down. Trust does not mean avoiding consequences, he said. It means telling the truth before someone else finds it. You told the truth. You put your own mistakes in the file when you could have buried them deeper. That is why the title is yours permanently. He slid a new cork float keychain across the desk. Orange foam, brass ring, 2 keys. On the side, in small engraved letters, Ops MGR. I clipped it to my belt loop. That afternoon, I walked the dock the way I did every Saturday. Slip 14 had a new vessel, another Aldridge boat, a 24-foot center console with a dark blue hull. Dr. Aldridge had renewed his storage contract after the incident, citing Hank's transparency and the accuracy of the report. He had shaken my hand at the board meeting and said, "You could have made my life very difficult, miss. Marsh, you chose not to." 2 other boat owners extended their contracts that month. The Marina did not lose a single client. Bo was at the fuel dock, hosing down the pump platform the way he did every Saturday afternoon, slow and methodical, the hose coiled at his feet. He looked up when I walked past. He nodded once. He went back to work. There was nothing else to say between us. There never had been. The work said it. The tide chart on the office wall showed high tide at 6:12 a.m. The channel was deep and clear, and the rocks were 15 feet under the surface where nobody could hit them even if they tried. Vivian's kitchen still had the demand letters. Troy was in the basement, scrolling a phone on a plan that was no longer on my account. Jean had not returned Vivian's calls in 3 weeks. The cracked cork float sat on her counter next to a phone that could not reach me and a stack of paper that could not be wished away. My apartment was quiet that evening. Windows open. The new cork float on my belt was smooth and whole, and it had my title engraved on it, because I had earned it by writing the truth on a form when the easier thing, the family thing, the thing I had done every season for years, would have been to move the numbers to a line nobody checked and let the system keep running on my back for another year. The keys stayed on my belt. They had never touched the water. Thank you for listening to Family Secret Tales. If this story meant something to you, subscribe and leave a comment telling me what you would have written on that incident report.